Noam Chomsky is a brilliant thinker. He first made a name for himself by revolutionizing the study of linguistics in the mid-20th century. But he is best known today for his political thought. He is the author of dozens of books about American foreign policy, corporate control, and media manipulation. One of his best-known works is a book that he co-authored entitled Manufacturing Consent, in which he dissects the various ways that the controlled corporate media filters the information that comes to the public. According to Chomsky, media control helps to shape public opinion into public consensus for American foreign policy decisions. He's best known for his calmly constructed, rational arguments against his opponents. He's also known for taking the moral high ground by giving his opponents the benefit of the doubt.
I will try, and I think we should, bend over backwards to give the benefit of the doubt to the United States government whenever it's possible. So if there's any dispute about how to interpret something, we'll assume they're right.
Using that technique as a starting point, Chomsky generally tries to build an irrefutable argument based on his opponent's own words. For example, that the American government is being hypocritical in attempting to wage a war on terror when they are in fact the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world. This is a very effective technique for attacking an opponent, so as we're about to show you how Noam Chomsky is in fact a controlled left gatekeeper, it might serve us well to give him the benefit of the doubt as well. Let's listen to Chomsky explaining in his own words how public opinion can be shaped, transformed, manipulated, and even created by simply controlling the acceptable limits of a debate.
When the state loses the bludgeon, when you can't control people by force, and when the voice of the people can be heard, you have this problem. It may make people so curious and so arrogant that they don't have the humility to submit to a civil rule, and therefore you have to control what people think. And the standard way to do this is the resort to what in more honest days used to be called propaganda. Manufacture of consent, creation of necessary illusions, various ways of either marginalizing the general public or reducing them to apathy in some fashion.
Now, let's listen to Chomsky reacting to the 9/11 truth movement, which is attempting to raise public awareness of the discrepancies, omissions, lies, and outright fabrications of the U.S. government and its potential complicity in the attacks of 9/11.
There is a large movement called the self-truth movement, which argues that 9/11 was some kind of inside job. There are two kinds of evidence presented. One kind is physical evidence, like how did Building 7 collapse. Now, I don't have the expertise in physics of the person who just spoke, so I don't know how Building 7 collapsed. But I do know that you can't pick up that expertise by a couple hours on the internet. Well, that's why they have graduate departments of mechanical engineering and so on in places like MIT. It's hard work. But if anyone thinks they have evidence for that, there's a way to proceed. The way to proceed is submit a paper to a scientific or engineering journal so that others can evaluate it. Well, to my knowledge, there hasn't been a single submission even, to any reputable science journal. There are submissions to the Journal of 9/11 Studies, but that's about as convincing as submissions to the Journal of Intelligent Design Studies.
By this logic, one would assume that the publication of a peer-reviewed scientific paper on the collapse of the World Trade Center, just 10 days after Chomsky made these comments, would be enough in Chomsky's eyes to establish the scientific viability of the idea that these two enormous office towers did not collapse completely into dust at free-fall gravitational speed because of fires and jet impacts. Indeed, just such a paper was published 10 days after Chomsky made these comments. So the question is, Do these same scientific standards hold for the 10,000-page report of the National Institute of Standards and Technology on the collapse of the two towers? Surprisingly to some, the scientific viability of this report is by no means certain. In fact, the 10,000-page report simply lists speculated initial conditions for the collapses to ensue, without even attempting to explain how 75% of the building's steel, unweakened by fire or damage, gave way at free-fall gravitational speed, turning into dust. In August of 2007, James Quintier, the former chief of the Fire Science Division of the National Institute of Standards and Technology, called for a peer review of the NIST investigation, saying, quote, "I think the official conclusion that NIST arrived at is questionable." In light of this information, it would be intellectually dishonest for Chomsky not to hold the NIST report to the same standards of scientific evidence that he holds the 9/11 truth movement. Well then, what is the other point on which Chomsky decides to attack the 9/11 truth movement?
The other kind of evidence is circumstantial evidence. So like, for example, the CNN reports, not comparable to something else. The problem with that is, you take any event in history you like, pick an arbitrary event, take a close look at it, you're going to find a ton of apparent evidence that doesn't make any sense. Things that contradict each other, things that contradict laws of nature, and so on. That's why scientists do experiments. That's why you don't just take videotapes of things happening in the world and see if you can figure out something from it. You won't. It's just too much math.
This is an example of a bizarre non sequitur, as described by researcher Barry Zwicker.
I did one interview with Chomsky, which came out as 3 on-air interviews. And then I interviewed him in Hamilton. And by this time, 9/11 had happened, of course, and so I asked him about 9/11. And that was when I was shocked and disappointed, and that he just immediately said, this is conspiracy theory. And I was already well aware of the intellectual bankruptcy of this put-down phrase, conspiracy theorist. And I could hardly believe that he was using it. Chomsky said to me, look, there's just conspiracy theory what you're saying. I gave him the question about 9/11, very logical and brief on a piece of paper so he could read it. And he just looked at it and threw away the paper. And he said, there's just conspiracy theory. And he said, look, you can make a case that there's a conspiracy about anything, even just a traffic accident. That's what he said. So I got to thinking about that later. So you can make a conspiracy out of a traffic accident. This is supposed to be, and is in fact, one of the world's greatest brains and minds, no question about it. So if you can make a case that there was a conspiracy behind a fender bender, does this mean, therefore, that any other case where it's being claimed there is a conspiracy is an invalid claim? No, doesn't logically follow, does it? Doesn't logically follow. So, but even take the fender bender thing. First of all, it's extremely unlikely that there would be conspiracy involved in any fender bender. But supposing you took an actual fender bender, you looked into it, you found out that one of the drivers caused the accident in an insurance fraud thing. Okay, now you found one. You found a conspiracy behind this accident. Does that mean that all other accidents are conspiracies also? No, that doesn't follow either. If you chase this down logically, it was a bizarre non sequitur.